Hello everyone and welcome to the BPI webinar for Residue Management. I'm Janine Wright, Custom Content Editor for Meister Media Worldwide. We'd like to thank you for joining us today. So now I would like to introduce you to our moderator, Bill Stoneman, who is the Executive Director of the Biopesticide Industry Alliance. Bill has served as the director since 2008. He serves the biopesticide and organic industries through regulatory consultation, assistance with organic listing of biological crop inputs, and biological crop development. Previously, Bill was Business and Development Manager at CHR Hansen, a Danish biotechnology company with ventures in food, agriculture, and industrial applications of microorganisms. Bill will tell you a bit about BPIA, and we'll introduce you to our other presenters. We'll turn the time over to Bill.
Thank you, Janine. Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. On behalf of the Biopesticide Industry Alliance and our 72 members, I am pleased to be your webinar moderator this afternoon. Meister Media Worldwide and their publications have worked closely with BPIA's Public Relations and Outreach Committee for production of today's webinar. We are sincerely grateful for all of their efforts. Before we start the webinar, I'd like to share a few comments about BPIA. As I mentioned, there are 72 member companies strong. Our members range from agricultural chemical suppliers to small biotechnology startups, all involved with biopesticides as developers, researchers, manufacturers, marketers, and service companies to the industry. At BPIA, we have two key missions. First is to improve the global acceptance of biopesticides as having a strong value proposition. We promote the adoption of the use of biological pesticides as having strong value in both conventional and organic cropping systems and for general home and institutional pest control. Our second mission is to facilitate the successful development, commercialization, and adoption of biological pesticides. As a trade group, we work to prevent governmental regulatory barriers to market entry in the interest of our industry. Now let's move on to our webinar. First, though, with an introduction of our speakers for today. Sri Funtner is Managing Director of Hartano & Company, LLC. Sri's diverse career ranges from running a full-service laboratory that specialized in pesticide, biopesticide, EPA registration field trial requirements, to global marketing manager with AgroFresh, and to supply chain technical management. As managing partner for Hartano & Company, Sri serves as a consultant to the agricultural, agrochemical, and retail industries for the implementation of best practices. Mark Reitnauer, Associate Professor at the University of Florida Indian River Research and Education Center. With 14 years of research and extension experience, Mark works to improve pre- and post-harvest practices to maximize fresh fruit quality and provides training and information to growers and packers to help overcome potential. Michael DeVincenzi, owner of DeVincenzi Agricultural Pest Management and Research. Michael DeVincenzi has been a licensed California pest control advisor and qualified applicator since 1972. He works as a pest management advisor in San Joaquin, California, where he advises on pest management issues for walnuts, cherries, apples, and other crops grown under both conventional and organic systems. Mike also conducts private contract research for various chemical manufacturers. Sri?
All right. Let's see here. Can you hear me? Hello?
Just fine.
I can't seem to move my slide. Janine, can you help?
Go ahead and try it, Sri.
No. Well, Janine, you're going to have to help me, I suppose. Well, Bill, thank you so much. I hope we can move the slides here. Okay, there we go. Sorry
You got
about
it?
that. I got it. All right, first of all, I'd like to thank the Biopesticide Industry Alliance for inviting me to speak here today. Bill has asked me to address the view from the supply chain, its challenges which may translate into opportunities for biopesticides. This view from the supply chain will hopefully fuel the question of how and where can biopesticides address these opportunities and actually show economic value. It's always been very difficult to show economic value down the supply chain. Here's an example. It's a simplified version of the supply chain. We, of course, do all of our work here. We do our hard work in the field to produce the best product for the market. We pack it, we ship it, we transport it to the DC, which is the distribution centers, to the warehouses if you're a big box retail operation, or to the stores. And we hope that by the time the consumer buys it, it is still a beautiful piece of fruit or vegetable so that the eating experience will be a pleasant one and the buying cycle continues. Having said that, as everybody can imagine, the supply chain faces a multitude of challenges. Next slide, please. Right now, we all know that we live in a global trade. The complexities of global trade is extremely high because the supply networks are not a simple hierarchy. The supply network looks more like a spider web than a nice, simple hierarchy. Just for a few facts here, within the next 50 years, our population is supposed to grow to reach 9 billion. Even though it has slowed down in the last 50 years, 9 billion is still a very, very large number. Our resources are diminishing, and environmental sustainability is going to be difficult to attain. Focus is going to go more into worker safety and fair treatments of workers, and we all know that the focus now is already on human health and especially on food safety. So with all these challenges, we obviously are looking at the opportunities. Next slide. All right. First of all, with these opportunities, with these challenges, opportunities will arise. But before we recognize what the opportunities are, we must understand the drivers and the needs within the supply chain. First of all, we can identify about 4 major drivers and their respective needs. And the first driver is always global regulations. Well, as the next 2 speakers will attest, the MRLs, or maximum residue limits, are by no means uniform on a global level. This lack of harmonization is not unique to MRLs only. This is also true for just about everything that touches the global trade. This lack of synchronized standards translate into major headaches, but also create avenues for opportunities such as branding and product differentiation. Next slide. So this slide here, and I know this is some pretty messy, but that's exactly what it is. It's messy. These are just a few examples of the supply chain global certification programs that are out there that the supply chain need to contend with. For example, if you have a Rainforest Alliance certification, this means that your product follow a sustainability program. If you follow SQF or Primus Lab certification, that means that your products have followed certain food safety standards. BRC Global Standards goes a little bit further. It implies that you have food safety standards and also ethical standards. Also, it includes the utilization of certain horticultural practices, for example, IPM, and the active use of reduction of conventional agrochemicals. And all these are variations of all these schemas that are out there. For example, Ag Code here is a traceability component and hence focuses on recall incidences. So you can imagine that All these programs are built on responsible production foundation standards and best management practices. Thus, if a product carries 1 or 2 or 3 of these certificates, it will communicate to the professional buyer that the product produced was done so under certain standards. The opportunity for biopesticide here is to be acknowledged and highlighted as a responsible and sustainable component within any of these certification schemes. So thus, that brings us to the consumers, because the consumers desire for more product transparency and an increasing demand for responsible products. Next slide. All right, so these consumers, which is all of us, will go to the store and they are looking for products that have now more nutritional labeling. People are looking for labels now. And also, there are some other labelings that are now being highlighted, which are GMOs. Unfortunately, when you're talking to buyers and when you're talking to consumers, sometimes people don't know the difference between GMO and biopesticides. So again, our industry need to recognize that issue and make sure that the communications is done properly, because GMO is considered bad and biopesticides may be considered good. And at the moment, it is totally misunderstood. People would like to have more and more locally grown, organic, and sustainable products. These are all opportunities for biopesticides to shine. One issue here is that I want to point out that also food safety certifications are going to be much more in focus because of the current FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, will require in the proposed rulings that there's going to be more and more monitoring. And the monitoring are going to be biological monitoring. Biopesticides, when they are being monitored, they don't have any residues or anything that can say whether or not a biopesticide is present. Oftentimes, the food safety monitoring is for generic indicators. So we want to make sure that the biopesticides do not produce false positives when monitoring is done. So this takes us to the next driver, which is science and technology. So all we do is very good science and very good technology, but we are still missing to convey to professional buyers. We need to understand how professional buyers and consumers evaluate and respond to products and communication efforts. Next slide. So what is the downstream value for biopesticides? And this is science and technology responsibility. Biopesticides can, of course, be integrated pre-harvestly in the field or post-harvestly at a packing plant as a residue management system. The downstream value is the opportunity to not just comply with MRLs, but also to reduce pesticide residues, because this latter component is a global sustainability factor and a core value for the retailer. So additionally, since biopesticides should work with mitigating rots and so on, the product shelf life is also sustained. And when product shelf life is sustained, food waste is decreased in store and in home. So now, when you look at this, you should realize that you have actually achieved 3 goals. One is MRL compliance. The second one, which is very important, is that the customer core value has been addressed. And the third, which I will show, which is actually one of the key items here for economic values, is food waste minimization. Next slide. This takes us to the supply chain itself. Within the entire supply chain, there is still unrealized potential in efficiencies and economic value. How do we quantify all this? All right, next slide. The answer here is the waste factor. The waste factor is a sustainable component in an entire program. What this means is if we can show that there's less waste in the DC or in the store, this translates to higher margins and higher net profit for the retailer. And then less waste in the home translates in more money to buy more fruits and vegetables and obviously a good positive eating experience, which is a consumer benefit. We combine the retailer and the consumer benefit, and we can actually quantify the value. So how can biopesticides impact this value and convey this message to the professional buyer and the consumer? Next slide. In order to answer that, we need to take a look at the procurement drivers, the drivers that makes the professional buyer assign that purchase order. Business leaders have found in sustainability a reflection of their core value. They realize that this now translates to savings for the consumer, and it also translates into less waste. I'm going to give you 3 examples, and these are 3 totally different types of businesses. Everybody knows who PepsiCo is. Everybody probably knows who Cargill's is, and everybody should know who Walmart is. PepsiCo is a Cargill is a distributor, and Walmart is a retailer. All these major companies are building value within their own agricultural supply chain, which translates into agrochemical management. For example, PepsiCo supports their practices and actually aggressively tries to have their supply chain substitute natural controls for some agrochemicals. This way they can say to their stakeholders that they foster the economic ecosystem balance, they reduce the greenhouse gases, and also reduce crop losses. Cargill and many other companies, also retailers, are using SEDEX, and you may want to look this up on the internet. This is a supplier ethical data exchange, which really fosters fair trade, fair worker environment, good horticultural practices with an emphasis of IPM and using traditional type of growing, which also means a focus on biopesticides or the use of natural and soft chemistry. Walmart has a very interesting program. In China, they have a Green Farmers Training Project, which their goal is to train 1 million farmers in China, these are small farmers, in order to go back to the traditional way of farming, using less and less pesticides and more soft chemistry and natural compounds, including biopesticides. Next slide. Walmart goes a little bit further, and their goal is to literally to create zero waste. One of our customers is working very aggressively with Walmart and actually quantifying the reduction of waste. They throw away. This is full of food waste, whether it's beyond the best by dates, or whether it's rotten, or it's not saleable, or they have to have markdowns. All that food is literally thrown into landfills. And this is just one DC that actually, on an average, throws 16 major dumpsters of waste per week. This company has shown by using their technology that they have been able to lower the waste by about 4.4 dumpsters per week. That means a lot of money for Walmart. So if we can focus on reducing waste, for example, Walmart has 3 components to their waste, recycling waste. Reducing their waste. 1 is recycling, 2 is donating, and number 3 is creating it into something else. Now, when you look up the U.S. EPA food waste hierarchy, and I've given you a couple of links there, you can see that creating is the highest, which is the most preferred way of taking care of waste. Mind you that when you do this, you can only use food waste that does not create chemical hazards or biological hazards. This biopesticide will fit in beautifully in this scenario. So the next slide will tell you that biopesticides really has a place in the supply chain and can show quantitatively an economic value to the retailer. First of all, of course, the global regulations driver will give you a branding opportunity. The consumer driver will give you a product differentiation opportunity. Science and technology actually goes right into the core value opportunity for the professional buyers. And the entire supply chain, if we look at the waste factor, we can actually start quantifying the economic strategy here. I think that is the last slide. And again, thank you. And I have given you my contact information there, so should anyone care to contact me and talk a little bit more about this, I'd be more than happy to do so. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Sheree. At this point in the webinar, we have a question we'd like to ask of the participants. So if you could take this quick poll, we'll give you a moment to do so. And I'll read the poll for you. I now have a better understanding of supply chain drivers and can use this to make decisions about biopesticide use in my own operation. And select one of the following, yes or no. Janine, I think we'll be just taking a moment here, and you'll move on to the next speaker. Mark Reitnauer.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? Guess I'm coming through.
Yes, you're fine, Mark.
I'm waiting for control. While I'm getting control, I want to focus on the impact of these pesticide residues on not only domestic markets but on international markets as well. And I come from working with the citrus industry. I'm a post-harvest physiologist, but got into this is because of the changes in the global market, and the industry really needed to know how these changes were going to impact how they did business, how they grew their product, and then how they marketed it as well. And so there was a lot of interest in this because things were changing very rapidly. So let's start off right away with what are these residue tolerances or maximum residue limits. Usually you'll hear this term thrown around in a lot of literature, and it's usually listed on these different websites. Well, these maximum residue limits are also referred to as import tolerances. And these are the maximum residues of specific chemicals, and we're usually using pesticides. They're allowed on the food that we're shipping to our various markets. In the U.S., the MRLs are usually based off of the maximum use labels. So whatever residue would be expected on that product if the product was used at its maximum rate according to the label is what they usually set that on. However, for other countries, they're independent, and so they can vary widely. And when you're looking at the literature, you usually see it expressed as milligrams of residue per kilogram products. So it'll be ppm, and milligrams per kilogram are ppm. Okay. For different countries, okay, many of our growers are producing not only for domestic markets but for international markets as well. And especially for the international markets, you know, at one time, usually these products, if they were being registered and used in the country of origin, were accepted by the receiving countries. But then more and more countries started developing their own regulations to regulate the type of residues that were coming in. And so in the 1960s, the FAO developed the Codex, which was an attempt to harmonize all these different varying regulations to make it easier to market globally. However, even though we have Codex, even more and more these different countries have developed what they call their own positive list. That means that if a particular material is not on their list, it is either not allowed or they sometimes have a default residue tolerance. But that default residue tolerance is usually around the level of detection. So if they detect it, usually you're still looking at a violation and a rejection of the load. Okay? So for these different markets, for the U.S., again, it's based on our label rates. And so if you're applying a product at its labeled rate, then you're usually not going to have any problem with exceeding a residue tolerance. However, different countries set their own, and so this greatly complicates the pest control choices out there. And you have to, and one of the things that I really try to stress, especially to our growers, is keeping on top of what the requirements are for your different destination markets, especially if you're going internationally. Fortunately, most of the biopesticides are exempt from residue limits, so they are a good choice in terms of kind of reducing some of that that monitoring headache that can be out there. Why do different countries have different MRLs? Well, one thing is some don't have the same pesticides, or they don't have the same crops, so there's not a kind of a push for them to develop them. Sometimes they maybe have them, but they haven't been submitted. All the different paperwork that has to be submitted to apply for these MRLs or residue tolerances takes a lot of work and expense. And sometimes it's been made and it takes a lot of time to actually get it passed through the country. And in fact, many times right now, companies who are registering a product in one country are simultaneously developing it for the other markets, especially markets of export, so that by the time that they can market that particular pesticide, say in the U.S., the areas that they were going to be exporting that product to are also getting their residue tolerances or allowable limits in place. Otherwise, no one's going to buy it because you can't use it on a product you're going to export to that country. Also, there are differences in the way that different countries calculate the residue tolerances. Some look at the parent chemical. Some look at some of the parents and also some of the byproducts and the metabolites that are produced from that. So it can get very complicated out there. Examples, European Union, okay? In 2008, they went through and passed their MRL regulation, which harmonized all the different MRLs for the different countries that are part of the EU. So that was a good thing, okay? Instead of looking at each individual country, they harmonized it, and so that now we just have to look at the one EU MRL levels. However, the European Union is one of those that has quite low usually MRLs or residue tolerances for many chemicals. And so they're often some of the lowest ones out there, and they change from time to time fairly regularly. Each year, usually, there are different changes. So throughout the season, countries are putting out notices that they're considering changes, and those are some of the things that I'm monitoring, these notifications, to let the industry know that there's a desire by countries to change. And then we put it up, or I point people to different sources of information, but it's vital that the growers are on top of this so that they know that these changes are going to take place, and they can make their management changes ahead of time so that they can anticipate these changes. There's an example of one product that was being sprayed out. It was applied 6 months before harvest. U.S. has a MRL of 10 parts per million for this particular material. Europe dropped it down to 0.05. The product was harvested 6 months after application. It was arrived in Europe at a 0.08 ppm, so it failed the residue tolerance and the load was rejected. And there isn't any negotiation on this. It's either rejected or it's wholesome. So an important thing are sources of information, where you can find and keep track of these things. This is our post-harvest website that I've put together. This is an important site. We have more focus on citrus here, but one of the things I've done is I've focused on where people can find the authoritative sources of information. So if you go to this website, and you go to the pesticide residue limits section of it, this next slide is just scroll down on that home page, and you see right in the middle it says pesticide residues and limits. And then you go there, and at the top I have our citrus MRLs that I update regularly. Last time I updated was December. But then below that are where we can go to find different key sources of information. I'm going to focus on this international maximum residue levels database that Foreign Agricultural Services maintains. It's really good. It's probably the best single site that you can go to out there, and I'll just demonstrate it here. But also on here are the sources of the authority for these MRLs. Next one down, you see we have the USA Code of Federal Regulations. That's where they officially post the residue tolerances, including exemptions. I have the subpart D, exemptions from tolerance. You can go to the next one is the European Union. So they have a website where you can look for whatever residue tolerances you're looking for your commodity and pesticide of interest for the European Union. And then Japan, Canada, Codex, because some countries still defer to Codex, Taiwan, Korea, and then this is something related to Europe again. But anyway, so there's a lot of good information on this site where you can go get the authority in what's taking place. So let's go to the International Max Residue Database. Here's the website if you want to use it. You just click on the accept and understand these terms. There's basic information about the about residue tolerances. You hit enter, and then you have 3 tabs at the top. And you've got the commodity, pesticides, and markets. So you go through and you select your commodity, whatever it is you're dealing with. Pesticide, and you can see there's a lot. This is the chemical name, not the trade name. So you click on the chemical name of interest, and then the markets. And you can click on multiple commodities, pesticides, and markets, and the database will search all of these, and it comes up with an output something like this. This is something I use for grapefruit. This is a post-harvest fungicide. And you can see it has the U.S. MRL on the bottom left, has Codex, and whenever you have this little red in the brackets, that means it's lower than U.S. MRL. EU, Canada, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. Okay, I've circled also Japan here because these MRLs get quite complicated. Japan has a 15 ppm MRL for this material, but because this is used post-harvest, you also have to, it has to be included on their food additives list. And so, this material is not yet on the Japanese food additive list, so even this can be a little misleading there. And each of these has footnotes too. So if you click on a footnote or hover over that, for example, these little footnotes here, additional information will come up to clarify commodity groupings and that type of thing. And also, you'll see up here it has, these are the default MRLs here, if you can follow my mouse, for different countries. And Canada right now still has a 0.1, although I've understood for some time they were going to either lower that or eliminate it, but they've been saying that for years and it still hasn't happened. Okay, another problem is that we don't have much information, but even individual buyers can set their own residue tolerances or request or require that certain pesticides not be used at all. Even though they're allowed by the country MRLs, each buyer may have their own individual requirements, and this includes things like food processors. There's been examples and they've had excessive levels of some sort of a pesticide or chemical. So you also need to know from your buyers what the requirements are, because these type of things are not widely distributed. You can't get this type of information very readily unless you're communicating directly with the buyer. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Bill.
All right, thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. And Janine, I believe we have another question coming up for the audience. Take a few moments to answer this question. I know where to get information I need regarding MRL tolerances for my produce operation. Select one of the following, yes or no. And I guess we'll wait for the poll results so you'll see how your answer compares with others in the poll. Here we are. 93% of you say you have more information now that you need regarding MRLs for produce in your operations. Very good. Our next speaker, Michael DeVincenzi.
Well, Bill, thank you and BPIA for asking me to give some input on this subject. I have a practice in the Central Valley and San Joaquin County in California pest management. And I've got clients that I work with, and we are the ones that have to live with the MRLs that Mark and Sri were talking about prior. So today we're just going to talk a little bit about what we do and how we live with them in the field and making decisions in pest management decisions, and also where biopesticides fit in on that, and also a few other little tidbits about how biopesticides work within either a conventional or an organic system. And I don't have control yet. There we go. Biopesticides and their relations to the MRLs. Most of the biopesticides, as you've already heard, have very close or a zero, what we call PHI, or pre-harvest interval. The pre-harvest interval is how many days or hours you can make an application of a product prior to harvest. Because the nature of the type of materials that biopesticides are, they are usually residue exempt and acceptable within that MRL issues that we've been talking about in most of the cases. They can also be used in season to help reduce populations that would reduce a need for possibly other products that you would use closer to harvest that would have an MRL issue. Some examples: pome fruit, apples and pears. We'll say apples in this case. Collie moth pheromone, which contains an active ingredient, cotylamone. We use a pheromone. This is a mating disruption or a mating delay type of a pheromone that is applied with units within a field, and this disrupts the mating ability of certain insects. In this case, collie moth, which is the primary #1 enemy, or the worm in the apple that we spend so much time on controlling, so we don't have it at harvest. It aids in season-long suppression of collie moth by suppressing the population. It's not a spray. We have there's little puffers that will puff out cotylamone, or there'll be what we call like meso-emitters that we can hang in so many trees that emit this throughout the season. And this is a very good example of a biopesticide and how it would relate for later on down the line. It also can help on resistant and non-resistant populations. So if you've got some resistance going on from other pesticides that you've been using for, in this case, collie moth, there's no resistance to this at this time that we know of, and it can aid in that respect. Let's see, we're alleviating the need for insecticide and MRL issues at harvest. We went through that. We'll move on. Another one in the collie moth for pome fruits and apples would be granulosa virus. And this virus is a registered biopesticide that we can also add to either use as a standalone, which we do, or in conjunction with another pheromone like we just discussed for collie moth management inside an orchard. It can also be used as a companion product with other products that may not be biopesticides to help reduce resistance from those other products, and particularly in a situation where populations are too heavy for the granulovirus to take care of it by itself. By using these lower dosages, we can better use the other products that we have in the field. So there's two ways of looking at using that. At the higher rate, if we have a high population going into harvest, and we may not be able to use other insecticides for collie moth control as we approach harvest, we can use granulovirus up to harvest because it has a 0 PHI and has no MRL issues. So that's another classic example of the different ways of how a biopesticide could help. Let's see, and then multiple harvest dates. For instance, if in California particularly, a lot of the apples were planted maybe 20 or years ago and after, so we had multiple varieties within the field with multiple harvest dates. Again, with those multiple harvest dates, you may want to be harvesting one variety and you still have pest management issues on the other variety that's going to be coming later. So by using pheromone or using granulosis virus, it'll give you a little bit of cushion by bringing down the population early so it's not so strong when you finally do want to start harvesting. Also, the pheromone that you have in the field will also give you some safety as far as getting what we call strikes or hit from the coddling moth on the varieties that are going to be remaining to be picked later on. Very useful in all those cases. Stone fruit, peaches, nectarines, plums. Similar, different pests. We have OFM, which is Oriental fruit moth. Again, pheromones and mating disruptions, similar as we use in coddling moth, can be used for OFM. And all the same positives on that would work in the same fashion. Peach twig borer, oblique banded leaf roller, fruit tree leaf roller, and green fruit worm all can be affected by what we call BT in the industry, or it's Bacillus thuringiensis. We'll call it BT for the rest of this webinar, just for simplicity purposes. Applied at bloom to petal fall can help control a lot of these pests. It is a biopesticide. It's extremely soft on just about, soft meaning easy on other biological agents that are in the field working for you, whether they would be beneficial insects or beneficial mites. If they also using these products in time, we can bring down populations, again, that by getting them down low and early in the season as a crop is either pollinating, starting to set, or going through the maturity process prior to harvesting, would bring the population down low enough so that you don't have a high population at harvest. Thus, you don't have to use products that would have a high MRL and keep you out of certain markets. Fungicides, we don't want to forget about those, and those are also can be used in rotation or as companion products with other fungicides or alone. They work sometimes as an alternative to the other products that we have in the field. Many of the biopesticide fungicides have very, very close or zero PHIs, and they work in well also as rotation with other fungicides we may be using in the field. Most of the fungicides we use have limits on how many times we can use them, so in a row. So we can add these to those or use them in between to break up the resistance issues that we would have for other classes of fungicides that may not be biopesticides. Some of the biopesticides are also used to close to harvest to manage diseases such as we're mentioning here, brown rot, powdery mildew, and gray mold or botrytis such as in cherry or in peach. These are three active ingredients of biopesticide fungicides, and each one of these active ingredients will have an effect on those three diseases that I just mentioned previously, and used in certain manners can work very, very well. If populations are real high, they may fall a little short. We have to understand the biopesticides as we do any materials that we use in the field. Everything has limitations. And if you understand that, we can go from there. So this is three products here. I can give you the name of the products if you want. Tomatoes, another one. I thought maybe we would use the same scenario in that. Again, as you're approaching harvest on tomatoes, whether it's fresh market tomatoes or cannery tomatoes here in California, we have very, very low thresholds of tomato fruit worm or sugar beet armyworm. Usually here in my area in California, you can't have much damage, otherwise you're going to get the crop knocked over. So knocked over meaning they won't accept it at delivery. BT, again, subspecies Iwazi has an effect on a broader spectrum or a different spectrum of worms, including the beet armyworm or some of the armyworms. And they will pick them up at lower, small instars or the earlier growth stages of those insects. So that would be one biopesticide that we would be looking at. It has zero PHI and it has no MRL issues. So in summary, we can use the biopesticides throughout the year to reduce our pest populations, as we talked about with the pheromone. We can reduce the need to close to harvest applications with products that have MRL issues, and they can be used actually themselves up to harvest if if the population allows it, and give you good efficacy. And these are just a few examples of how they work in our pest management here in California. To be as successful as possible, again, you should know the product you're recommending. So be familiar with the biopesticides strong and weak areas as you would with any product that would be advised. And then that goes without saying. You have to know the tools that you use and go from there. One of the things I really enjoy using biopesticides when we can is they are soft, and they do work in very well into an integrated pest management system. We manage the pests. We don't really control them. We manage them and keep their levels down to economic threshold levels that would meet market standards, and that's what we're trying to do. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you folks.
Well, thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. And we have another poll question for the audience before we wrap up with some questions. And this quick poll question is, I have a better understanding of how to fit biopesticides into my pest control programs to limit residue potential in produce. And of course, select one of the following. And we'll show the poll results in just a moment. And Janine, I would remind folks that you can ask questions. There should be a panel to the right-hand side of your screen where you can add in a question, and our presenters will do their best to answer them. If we can't answer them, we'll follow up later with direct contact with the requester. So we have a response here now to our poll. 89% of you have a pretty good idea of how to fit biopesticides into your pest control programs. Janine, do we have any questions waiting?
We do. We have a lot of them coming in. So let's see, quite a few about MRLs. Biopesticides, which are exempt from residue tolerance, rarely show up on published lists of MRLs. How best to make growers and others aware that there are alternatives that do not add to regulated residue levels?
Any of the panelists able to answer that question?
Can you repeat that one, please?
Sure. They're saying a lot of biopesticides, which are exempt from residue tolerance, rarely show up on published lists of MRLs. How can we best make growers and others aware that there are alternatives that do not add to regulated residue levels?
Well, I think venues like this are a key way. Putting out information and talking to growers about the potential benefits and reducing some of the complexity of meeting some of these export requirements is the way to keep about doing it. I don't have any other specific recommendations. I think this should be done also in combination with the production specialists in not just talking about one particular aspect, but talking about the system. How does it get integrated in the system? How does it replace or complement what's already being done? And what are the downstream benefits?
Okay.
Thank you, Mark.
Let's see.
Process, or whether they're large or small, to force anything down. That would be against their policy. However, especially now with the new proposed rules from the Food Safety Modernization Act, there's going to be an element of supplier approval programs. So whether you're a small buyer or whether you're a very large buyer, every single entity out there will have a supplier approval program. Within that supplier approval program, there's going to be elements as to whether or not biopesticides would be accepted or whether the certain standards need to be met. So the key is to obviously work with the buyer directly, because every single business entity has separate and individual requirements as to how to fit within their program. Having said that, the communications as the use of biopesticides are never communicated to the buyers, and this is where I would like to focus in. When you do use a biopesticide, do let them know that biopesticides are being used, because it's a double-edged sword. Biopesticides can become an issue when monitoring comes into play, when the suppliers have to do biological monitoring for possibly from a generic E. coli, because sometimes BTs will provide a false positive, which create havoc. Secondly, on the positive side is biopesticides are very well enhanced in any kind of their sustainability program or ethical programs or reducing residues program. So work with the buyer.
Okay, thanks, Sri. Are there any biopesticides for citrus greening?
You know, I'm not sure if it's been, there have been some that have been evaluated, and I'm not sure if they are registered yet. So that's something that we will have to get back to you on.
Okay. Let's see. It says, I thought the use of BT was being faded out on account of its role in damaging pollinator populations. Are these kind of considerations being made when selecting biopesticides?
I guess I should take that. This is Mike. I wasn't aware of that, and I would have to see some of that data, but we're very, very cognizant here in California, means we rely so heavily on the bee industry for pollination of just about a good many of our tree crops. And we take all those things in consideration prior to making any recommendations for anything that would even remotely put our bees that are pollinating in the field in any danger.
I know that this is true for the neonicotinoids, but I'm not sure that I've ever heard anything relative to BT either, Janine.
We've had a lot of issues with colony collapse here in California, and there's been a lot of finger pointing in a lot of different ways by a lot of different people, and then there's been a lot of science on both sides showing that certain things cause problems, certain ones don't. So I probably would say, you know, each case, individual case, I think would have to be looked at in a situation like that. I'm not aware of BT having any problems, at least using it the way we have here in the past.
Okay. You know, Mark, a question here, but while he's talking, there's been some requests for Shree's contact information and also the University of Florida website, so if we could flip back to those slides for a minute. And while we're doing that, the question for Mark is, are there MRLs used as non-tariff barriers? Or are they used as those sometimes?
Well, yeah, you can't really, it's hard to prove these type of things, but that's one of the reasons why the WHO will send out notifications of proposed changes. And when a country does that, then the industries respond, and they'll argue as hard as they can and go through our U.S. consulates and negotiators, and they'll try to make their best cases to argue that a particular low MRL will become a trade barrier. And many times they're not listened to, but once in a while I have noticed that they have relented and allowed the higher the residue tolerances. So yes, showing it as proving something like that is difficult.
Okay. What's your opinion of phytochemicals like pyrethrum or others?
An opinion in, this is Mike, an opinion in, I'm not sure an opinion into what pyrethrum is used. We use it probably more so, at least in our area, in the organic systems rather than the conventional. In the organic system, they can't use pipronol butoxide, which is a synergist that helps helps on the efficacy of the product, but still, nevertheless, we do use it on occasion in there. The opinion of the product is a very, very short-lived knockdown type of a product that, if applied properly, can can help, depending what the situation is.
Okay. We probably have time for one more quick question. For Sri, specifically, what advantage do biopesticides have in minimizing chain waste versus conventional pesticides?
I'm sorry, repeat that, please, Janine.
Sure. What advantage do biopesticides have in minimizing chain waste versus conventional pesticides?
Chain waste?
Chain waste.
Oh, chain waste. Well, first of all, when you're looking at the waste requirements, again, I have to go back to the Food Safety Modernization Act. There's going to be proposed rulings for animal feed. So much of this waste is actually created, food waste is created for utilization in animal feed, in energy production, and also in composting. Now, composting and animal feeds will become under the rulings of the Food Safety Modernization Act, which means that there has to be certain criteria which minimizes the chemical hazards and the biological hazards and also physical hazards. Now, biopesticides typically are going to be very benign in any of those. Conventional pesticides or conventional chemicals may be cumulative and may become a chemical hazard. So when you use a biopesticide, you're already way steps ahead, and the recipient will not have to worry whether or not when he or she is utilizing it as an animal feed or a compost, whether the chemical accumulation is going to create a future downstream hazard. This is the reason why biopesticides is a perfect candidate for promoting zero waste.
Okay. Thanks, Sri.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is about all we have time for. We want to thank you for joining us today, and we want to thank, on behalf of BPIA and Meister Media Worldwide, we want to thank our presenters for a great webinar. Thank you for joining us, and have a great day.